Can you all hear me okay?
Oh, yes.
My name is Ginger Olszewski, and it's my pleasure to welcome everyone to tonight's evening with novelist Suzanne Kamata, here at NeverMore Books, co-presented by our nonprofit Pat Conroy Literary Center. Suzanne is visiting us from Japan to talk about her newest book, The Baseball Widow. Annabelle Lyon, author of Consent, praised the novel by saying, Suzanne Kamata deftly offers both an insider's and an outsider's view of Japan. Through a diverse group of characters brought together by Japan's passion for baseball, she explores identity, the loss of idealism, and the ragged beauties to be found in that loss. A review in the Japan Times added, Kamata's authentic glimpse into Japanese life is appealing, and her prose deftly exposes her character's flaws while evoking empathy. The Baseball Widow is a moving read of great emotional depth. After graduating from the University of South Carolina with a degree in English, Suzanne went to Japan on the JET program to help teach English in public schools for just 1 year. She wound up marrying a Japanese high school phys ed teacher and staying. Her first novel, Losing Kai, was published in 2008 and later translated into Russian. Since then, she has published a number of books in various genres, including the award-winning young adult novels Gadget Girl, The Art of Being Invisible, which was an APAWA honor book and designated a Book of Outstanding Merit by Bank Street College. Screaming Divas, about an all-girl punk rock band in 1980s Columbia, South Carolina, which was named to the ALA Rainbow List and featured on MTV.com. And Indigo Girl, winner of a Gold Nautilus Award for Young Adult Fiction, an SCBWI Crystal Kite Award, and honorable mention for a Freeman Book Award. The Baseball Widow, her first, most recent novel for adults, was named an official pick of the International Pulpwood Queens and Timber Guys Book Club. It was awarded a Gold Ippy and named a Shelf Unbound 2021 Top Notable Book, shortlisted for the 2021 SEBA Somerset Book Awards, and as a work in progress, named a finalist in the William Faulkner William Wisdom Creative Writing Competition. Having raised twins, Suzanne lives in Tokushima Prefecture, Japan, on the island of Shikoku with her husband and 2 cats. She visits South Carolina once or twice a year. Please join me in welcoming Suzanne Kamata.
Thank you, Ginger, and thank you all for coming out to hear me. This is my first time in a bookstore, I think, in like 5 years. And yeah, so I'm very excited to be here. And this is my first visit to Beaufort.
Oh.
So I was telling Jonathan earlier that I've always wanted to visit Beaufort, but I've never had an excuse. I've never gotten around to it, so I'm delighted to be here. So I'm going to start by telling you a bit about myself, because the first question people often ask is, how much of your book is autobiographical? So maybe you can listen and you can kind of figure it out for yourself. And I'll also tell you a bit about where I live now. So I think Ginger mentioned that I was born in Michigan, in Grand Haven, Michigan, and when I was 16, my father's company moved to Lexington, South Carolina. So my mother and I and my father came down to South Carolina to live. So it was my last year of high school, if you can imagine that.
Oh.
And my brother stayed behind. He went to he was starting college. So I finished up high school in a strange new town, and I had wanted to be a writer, since childhood, and I wrote for the school newspaper, and I was aspiring to be a writer from very young. So when I was in high school, I won a National Merit Scholarship, and I was interviewed by the neighbors section of the state newspaper in Columbia, and I said that when I grew up, I wanted to write. I didn't know what it was going to be about, but I wanted to write a book that kids would have to read in school. and actually, my dream has come true because some of my books have been assigned in school, so that part came true. And after I graduated, I went to, as Ginger said, I went to the University of South Carolina, and I majored in English. Go Gamecocks. And my sister-in-law too, back there. And I majored in English, and I wanted to have an experience living abroad to gather material for my stories, right? Yeah. So it was a toss-up between the Peace Corps, and I would have been assigned to Cameroon, and Japan on the JET program. And the Peace Corps was for 2.5 years, and the JET program was like somewhat cushier because there was a salary, and and my brother kind of persuaded me to go to join the JET program, and I thought after that I will go to Africa. But I'm still living in Japan.
Wow.
So yeah, so I was so I don't know if you know about the JET program, but it's a government-sponsored program that puts native speakers in public schools so that the students will be motivated to try to speak English. And I was assigned to a school. I said, first of all, I don't want to go to a big city like Tokyo or Osaka. I want to see the real Japan. And that's what I got. So I was assigned to a city, a small town actually, on the island of Shikoku, where there is no high-speed bullet train, not so much neon. It's considered rural by Japanese people, wouldn't you say? Yeah. So, and there are a lot of little islands around there. So my image was, okay, I'm going to be like the first foreigner that these kids have ever seen. And to prepare, I thought I read The Water is Wide, because I thought maybe kind of like that. You know? I mean, I didn't expect them to be so disadvantaged, but you know, I knew I would be something new for them. So to prepare, I did read that book, and also some like Japanese novels in translation. And yeah, so when I arrived in Japan, or I'd spent a bit of time there, especially around Shikoku, I found like some interesting similarities between South Carolina and Shikoku. So like for one thing, indigo was produced. It still is, but not as much as before, and it's still like a kind of a trademark product. And of course, in South Carolina too, it was one of the crops that one of the crops produced, right? So there was actually, I'm sure you know this, but there's another book called The Indigo Girl, which is really popular, and I think a lot of people mistakenly buy my book. So even though it wasn't reviewed in like trade reviews like Publishers Weekly and whatnot, it's done really well. so yeah, thank you, Natasha Boyd. Okay, so indigo, and also of course there are many typhoons, and here there are many hurricanes. And the flora and fauna is also very similar. So where I live, there are a lot of wild boar, and sea turtles come to lay their eggs on the beach in Shikoku, and the same kind of shorebirds, and azaleas, wisteria, and also, you know, the sense of hospitality is very similar. the kind of, like all over Japan, like the kind of regret about losing a war. So I thought like all of those things were like really kind of interesting and, you know, similar. And, you know, also baseball. So where I live, there's a kind of a super minor league team called the Indigo Sox. So yeah, there was a professional baseball player who wound up in the Indigo Sox. It was kind of sad. He was in the Yankees and then he went to the Indigo Sox. But yeah. Yeah, so baseball is extremely popular, and when I arrived in Japan, one of my earliest memories is of like taxi drivers and people in restaurants and stores, like watching the high school baseball on TV or listening to it. And everyone was engaged, and I'd really never seen anything like it. And when I arrived at the school I was assigned to, it was called Naruto. I was told, oh, our baseball team went to Koshien this year, and I said, okay, whatever that means. But you know, I quickly found out it was a really big deal. So my own background in baseball, like growing up in Michigan, we were Tiger fans, and then of course the baseball team at the University of South Carolina was national champion. Twice, right? 2 times in a row, I think. And also another bit of trivia. Does anyone know of Kenshin Kawakami? So he was maybe the first Japanese player to play for the Atlanta Braves, and he's from Tokushima. So, yeah. Okay, so. In my second year living in Japan, I met he wasn't a high school baseball coach yet. He was a PE teacher, an aspiring high school baseball coach. And I decided I wanted to stay in Japan and see how that played out. And I wound up marrying him. So when we got married, he was a weightlifting coach. And then a couple of years later, he became the very first coach at a brand new high school. So it was an academic high school. So in Japan, schools are kind of divided into vocational or academic. And I don't know, kids who go to the academic schools they're not very athletic, right? So, and they don't put a lot of effort into the sports like here. So his first team was like, he managed to get like 9 guys together, and some of them had never played baseball before, and they were always like, they lost every single game, and the scores were like 20-0, and then like they would want to quit because it wasn't fun because they weren't winning, and so he'd have to stay like 2 hours late after school to try to talk them into not quitting, you know. So he was very, very busy, and yeah. So and I was already like kind of a baseball widow because it was consuming. And in Japan, baseball season pretty much lasts in high school. It's pretty much year round. So students choose one sport, and they do it for usually 3 years. And in summer, winter, fall, spring, year round, they have baseball. So it's very time-consuming and very, very busy. So during this time, I was like trying to get my writing career off the ground, and I decided before I married him that I wouldn't stay unless I could have a literary life. This little island where nobody speaks English, right? So I started a literary journal, and I met some people that way, an English language literary journal, and I put together an anthology of short stories by expatriates in Japan, which turned out to be my first book. It's called The Broken Bridge. And after I had twins, one of whom was disabled, I quit my job teaching English and stayed home, was a stay-at-home mom. And I thought, okay, this is the time when I will write my book. So I did. I managed to write a novel, and it was published by Leapfrog Press in Wellfleet, Massachusetts. And at the time it was owned by Marge Piercy and Ira Wood. So Marge Piercy was like a iconic 1970s feminist writer, but her husband, Ira, mostly managed the press. And he was a big baseball fan. So around that time, the Boston Red Sox had just acquired Daisuke Matsuzaka. Yeah. And they paid a lot of money for him. So Ira, he was more than talking about my book, he was like, do you think it's going to be okay? Like, you should ask your husband, is it going to be all right? And then he said, why don't you and your husband write a book about baseball, Japanese baseball? It's like my husband doesn't really, my husband's not interested in writing, and he's, he doesn't, I've never seen him read a novel. But he was willing to answer any question I had about baseball, so I just grilled him. And so after my first book was published, I wrote The Baseball Widow, the first draft, and I sent it to my agent at the time, and she said, are you going to revise it? So I knew it wasn't, ready to be a book, but I didn't really know what to do with it. So this was in 2008, and I just basically set it aside. And every now and again, I would go back and dig it out and work on it some more. And maybe I wasn't ready to write it then. So it took a long time. And I published some other books in between. And my daughter is deaf and has cerebral palsy. So I spent a lot of time with her at school, learning Japanese sign language, which is different from American Sign Language. And I edited a book about a collection of literary writing on raising a child with disabilities. At the time we said special needs, but it's always changing. And I wrote a couple of young adult novels, and then finally I decided to go back to The Baseball Widow, and now it's here. So that's the story. Okay, so would you like to? Do you have any questions?
Do you work with an editor? Is your editor here in the United States? Do y'all just go back and forth? Can you talk a little bit about your writing process?
My writing process. Okay, so now that we have the internet, things are much easier. I think before editors were kind of cautious about working with writers abroad. But now, I can, just work with editors in the United States. So my editor is in Oregon for this book. So we just communicated either by Skype or Zoom or, by email.
How did you get them? How did you get Wyatt Mackenzie?
Oh, well, when she first started the press, about 25 years ago, she did a lot of books related to motherhood, and one of my first books was an anthology of essays on kind of multicultural mothering, mothering across cultures. And I approached her with this idea, and she really liked it, so that was our first book together. And then we did, she published a short story collection of mine, and I wrote a book, another novel set in Michigan, and then I wrote a travel memoir about traveling with my daughter, like to Paris, with a wheelchair. So we have like a relationship, a history.
Oh, cool. So you sound like you're incredibly prolific. I mean, my gosh, how many have
They're
you
short
written?
though.
And,
Like my books are so
and,
short.
and so just it's not the same genre. I mean, you touch on a lot of different areas. How are you able to do that? That's pretty impressive.
Maybe like being isolated.
Oh, okay.
Without a lot of distraction at this island with, that's my connection to my language or something. I don't know. Like I have a lot I want to say.
Oh, that's cool. You have a lot you want to say.
That people haven't said before, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I should be the one to share it.
Wow.
Yeah, so I thought if somebody else doesn't write a book about, Japanese baseball,
It's up to me.
I'll do it. Yeah.
Way back in the day, I don't want to exactly say how far back. There was a book by a writer named Robert Whiting.
Yeah, I know.
You
I
gotta
know
have
him.
wa.
Yeah, it's
Right.
like I acknowledged him.
Oh, you do? Oh,
Yeah.
and it was, his book was had a lot to do with culture clash of Americans going to play baseball there, and a lot of humorous things going on there. But I take it, and I've got your book here, and I'll read it to find out for myself. But this seems to be a more serious side of baseball, or of the culture of baseball in Japan.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of about baseball and kind of not. Like someone said once, it's like the way that Friday Night Lights was not really about football. So I think even if you don't like baseball or don't know about it, you could probably understand it. So I wanted to write a book about how different, like my family is bicultural, right? So about how parents of two different cultures might feel about a child with disabilities, because different cultures treat disability in different ways. So I had that idea, and then the publisher of my first book suggested a book about baseball, and I thought I could sort of combine those ideas, and then baseball seemed to have more of an impact on our lives than our daughter's disability. Because my husband was never there, and I had to do everything by myself, and I was the foreign American mom, so I wanted to put that experience into a book, and it was hard, so, yeah.
So are you saying that this book is autobiographical?
I'm saying a lot of it is autobiographical. A lot of it is based on my experiences, yeah, but not entirely. There are 4 points of view. So the point of view of the baseball widow, Christine, and her husband, who's a baseball coach, and also a baseball player, a high school baseball player, and a few scenes of his mother. So, but I thought it was kind of I actually hesitated to publish it because I thought it was too dark. But I don't know. People have responded pretty well, so maybe it was okay. I think I can be funny, but the book was maybe written from a dark, like a challenging period in my life, right? So,
So, how do you relate to Siki? Masaoka Siki, then you have the epigraph here.
So he's from the same island, right? And he wrote baseball haiku.
Yeah, he translated baseball terms into Japanese.
And he translated baseball terms into Japanese, and he kind of brought baseball to the Japanese people through his writing. Yeah. Yeah. So I've been to the museum.
Oh, right.
Yeah, he died really young.
He was ill almost all his life.
Right. He was like only 30, or maybe not even. Yeah. So.
And
Yeah.
who was that?
Masaoka Shiki. Yeah. And his your haikus, right? So,
Yeah, he's the one of the 4 masters of haiku in Japan. Study with Basho. He's the 4th one. So it's really
yeah,
famous.
I love his haiku. Yeah. No problem. Yeah.
Well, since you've come all the way to Beaufort, would you mind sharing your Pat Conroy story with us?
It's like really long.
It is. we only do long stories in Beaufort.
Okay. Well, okay. So,
Come a long way, right? So we have fun.
Come on,
yeah,
Ray.
I actually wrote a version of this which Jonathan's read. So I was thinking a while ago about how like at different key periods in my life, like Pat Conroy was there, or I was reading a Pat Conroy book or something like that. So the first book I read was The Lords of Discipline. Okay. And I read it right before we moved to South Carolina, so maybe I was preparing. But I remember having read it, having read a review of it somewhere, and then I was compelled to read it, and I really loved it. And I recorded it in my diary, like, oh, I want to be a writer like this, right? And I dug that up a little while ago. And then, of course, I read The Water's Wide to prepare for going to teach in Japan. And before that, I was reading Prince of Tides when I went to meet my college boyfriend's mother.
Wow.
And she had never heard of Pat Conroy, if you can believe that. And I was trying to explain, and I want to be a writer, and she was a lawyer, and all her kids were super ambitious, so she wasn't impressed with me. And so we broke up, and then later, one of my first dates with my Japanese husband, my now husband, was to see the movie version of Prince of Tides, which was called South Carolina. It was shown in Tokushima.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was like meeting my husband, breaking up with a college boyfriend, and then and of course I read some other. I read Beach Music, and when I wrote a novel about an all-girl, a fictitious all-girl punk rock band in 1980s Columbia, South Carolina.
Wow.
Which was based on my club days. but the girls in the book are wilder than I was. I didn't do those things. But I had a lot of fun writing it, and it was shopped around for a while, but it didn't find a publisher. It was either before its time or something, right? So when Pat Conroy and Jonathan started the Story River Books in print, I submitted Screaming Divas to them. And to my amazement, they responded with like a three-page response. It wasn't an acceptance, but it was like all this like books that I should read and ways that I could improve it and improve the plot, and it was just like amazing. I'd never gotten such a thorough and considered letter from an editor before, ever, not even for the books I published. So, I thought, well, if I could really do this, that would be such an amazing book, right? But I also had an offer from another press to publish it as a young adult book. And Jacqueline Machard, who had a best-selling book maybe 30 years ago, she was like the #1 best-selling book for a year or something. But anyway, she was like the editor, and she wanted to acquire that book. And so I thought, I don't know if it was a good choice, but I published it with, it was called Merit Books, and then I got myself invited to the South Carolina Book Festival. It was the last year it was held, and I was a local, so maybe like thought they were saving money because I could see my parents and so you could come if we don't have to pay for you. But I wanted to stay at the hotel with the writers, right? So I paid for my own hotel room, and I came out of my room, and there was Pat Conroy, and he was like, "And who are you?" I realized he was very curious and very interested in people, and I said, "I'm Suzanne Kamata," and maybe I said I wrote the Screaming Divas, and he's like, "I love that book." I thought, like, well, if you really loved it, you would have mentioned it. But he had remembered the plot, and he told the people next to him what it was about. So I was like really happy. It was a great meeting. And then I waited for hours in line to have my book signed by him. And he mentioned the Screaming Divas. So yeah, so I'd always thought that I would write another book. That maybe even the baseball widow that I would submit to Story River Books, but then Jonathan came here, and Pat Conroy died. So, but it was that I kind of like how my life has been framed by my adult life has been framed by encounters with Pat Conroy's writing.
What are you working on now?
So I'm actually working on a multicultural beach novel set in South Carolina. So it's set during the pandemic, because when I was in Japan, like during the height of the pandemic, I was my heart was kind of over here. I was worried about my family, and everything in Japan was safe, very safe, and kind of boring because everything was canceled. But over here it was like chaos, right? I mean, from Japan, that's what it looked like. And so I started writing this novel set in South Carolina. And a lot of beach novels are about white people at the beach, and I'm white, but my family is very multicultural. So like my sister-in-law is Indian American and my husband is Japanese. So when we went to the beach together with our kids, there's all these mixes of cultures. So I wanted to write a novel, a multicultural beach novel. And I have a draft, but it needs work. So
Good.
Yeah.
How large is the area where you currently live in Japan? You say you're on an island, like, is it just one town? Is it numerous towns? Is it,
No, it's actually pretty big.
Pretty big.
It's probably about the size of South Carolina. I don't know. I mean, driving, it takes like 3 hours to drive from Tokushima to Ehime, from the middle to. So, do you have
But whole Japan is about the size of California.
I know. So it's
And then Shikoku is probably the smallest of the main islands.
right.
So we're talking
I
about
don't know.
maybe
We could just-
15%
yeah.
of California.
Okay.
Yeah. What would that be comparable to?
Maybe.
Like a Hawaiian island or something. But it's very there are mountains, so yeah, so it's hard to get across the island. There are a lot of tunnels, but yeah, I'm not sure. I could look it up.
So
but
where you are, were there, how well did Pat Conroy's The Water is Wide but prepare you for
maybe like it inspired me to teach or something. Like, okay, I'd never
Okay.
experienced teaching, so I was like, in the book he didn't have experience teaching those kinds of kids. So, but I sometimes his prose is too difficult for most Japanese students. Like, and only one of his books, to my knowledge, has been translated into Japanese. So I sometimes show I teach at a Japanese university now, so I sometimes show my students Conroy, and I do like a PowerPoint about Pat Conroy, and I show them Conroy, and we discuss various things, and I show it with. Sometimes I have them also watch a movie called 24 Eyes, which is also a story about a teacher who comes from abroad and goes to an offshore, like to a barrier island to teach kids who are, so it's kind of similar. Those two stories are similar. So I'm always looking for similarities, like ways that connect people. So I think Japanese students can appreciate a lot of The Water is Wide and Conroy. I wish it was translated into Japanese.
Which is the only book that is translated in Japanese?
My Losing Season.
Oh, really?
Jonathan has it.
I do. There's one in my office,
In
which I'll show you
Japanese.
tomorrow. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Miho gave it to me as a gift, so I'll show it to you when you come to the
I
center
have
tomorrow.
it, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
yeah, so I don't know, like Japanese schools are very strict. So I think I don't know, or maybe like sports. Sports are a really big thing. Like as baseball is really popular, there's a lot of like manga, the comic books about high school sports. So because, like I said, they're all consuming, like people spend 3 years in this really intense environment. So there's a lot of literature, like Japanese or popular books about sports. So that might be a reason why people like the basketball book. Yeah.
Is your husband still involved with baseball? And do you all plan, is Shikoku your forever home? Do you see yourself living there with your family? Having lived in Japan for a number of years, I know sometimes it's a bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
And sometimes you need a little bit of a break, but it seems like you've done very well.
Thank you. So the first question was, is my husband still a baseball coach? Okay, I'll tell you a story about my husband. So we had a lot of challenges in our family. So, and I was, almost like a single mom for a long time. And his goal was always to get to Koshien, right? And every year, like, they made it to the finals twice.
Wow.
And once it was like the 12th or 13th inning, they lost, right? So it's very emotional, and everyone has an opinion. The parents call, and they have the plays that they would have made, and so it was just really stressful, and we didn't see him. So he decided at one point, he finally decided that he would change schools to a less stressful environment, to a school for the disabled. And the school year starts in April, and the summer tournament is in July and August, right? Or July. So the players, they had been, most of them had been with him the previous spring, right? So right after he quit, his team, the team that he built, made it to Koshien.
Oh, man.
So it was like really, I don't know, it was bittersweet, because if he had gone with his team, he never would have quit, and we never would have seen him, right? And he got a lot of credit for building the team, so he was on TV and radio. But it was better for our family, and so he had more time to spend with our son and with his baseball, little league baseball. But now he's like a weightlifting coach again, which is less stressful. And as for staying in Shikoku, so my daughter has disabilities, and she's well provided for in Japan, and she doesn't know English, and it might be hard for her to learn. So I guess it would be a matter of, do I want to live far away from my daughter, or do I want to drag her someplace where she can't communicate? So that's a hard question. I would ideally I'd like to spend 6 months here, 6 months there, but it's a hard question. I don't want to say I'm going to live there forever, because you don't know, but yeah, I don't know.
And I don't think you could overstate too much. I remember being in Japan, Koshien, which is kind of the equivalent of our Williamsport, where we have the
Yes.
Little League World Series?
Yeah.
It's probably that times
It's like-
100.
yes,
I
exactly.
mean, Japan just stops. Every taxi has got it on. Every bar has got it on. It is an entire nation watching high school young men play this tournament. It's really quite astounding. So to have
Right.
gotten there is huge.
It was huge, yeah, and it's like 50,000 people, watching your little high school team, right? And like the opening ceremony, like the emperor comes and they drop a baseball from a helicopter, and
Oh, goodness.
it's very the ceremony is very impressive, and all this teams marching together in lockstep. And the local teams get all kinds of publicity, like for weeks at a time, like what they're doing for training, and they're on the cover of the newspaper, and it's like a celebrity experience. And I think the coaches get a bonus, like a cash bonus, and most of the Japanese players that you see, if not all, that you see in MLB games, they played in Koshien. They were probably discovered there, like Shohei Ohtani and Ichiro and anyone you can think of, Daisuke Matsuzaka. So and also I've heard that if you can say that you played at Koshien, it would help you get a job, because that much dedication and effort must mean something. So it's huge.
Well, and the most important question, do you like baseball?
I do. I'm not like a super fan, as you might think, but I was surrounded by it, and I did enjoy, going to my husband's games and going to baseball games. And I do enjoy baseball, yeah, but I do. What are we doing in time? Would you like me to read a little?
Sure.
Okay. All right. So this part is about Koshien. Okay. And this is from Hideki's point of view. So Hideki is the baseball coach. Okay. Way back in the beginning, when Hideki had been unsure of whether Christine would stay in Japan or not, when he'd still been thinking of her as a flight risk, he brought her to the baseball stadium at Koshien. It was a test of sorts. She already knew that he'd been the star of his high school and college teams, that he'd been almost good enough to play professionally, that he'd become a high school teacher in order to be a baseball coach. And if he became a baseball coach and his team won the prefectural championship, they would be able to participate in the national tournament on this very field, Koshien. It wasn't just any baseball stadium. It wasn't just the home of the Hanshin Tigers. This place was hallowed. After each game in the spring and summer tournaments, the losing players would drop to their knees and scoop up dirt to take home with them. Dirt that they would enshrine and keep forever as a memory of fleeting youth and dreams attained or thwarted. And Hideki wanted to make sure that Christine understood all that before things went any further. At the time, Hideki had been teaching at a night school, one of those hardcore assignments that were given to young, freshly licensed teachers in the public school system, or to veterans who turned out to be oddballs, those who didn't quite fit in. His students were often at risk. Some of them had fathers in prison, mothers who worked late at night in hostess bars. One girl had dropped out of day school to have a baby. Christine had a job as an assistant English teacher up the coast in Naruto on a one-year government program. She could renew her contract a couple of times if she wanted to, but she seemed restless. She talked about going to Thailand to teach English in a Cambodian refugee camp, or traveling through India with a backpack, and maybe helping out Mother Teresa for a few months. I don't feel like anyone really needs me here in Japan, she said. Back then, people were talking about how the US was in decline, how Japan was set to conquer the world, Hawaii, MGM, the Rockefeller Center. All of it belonged to them now. The students that Christine taught were, she said, slightly contemptuous of the United States. What did they need her for? I need you, Hideki had wanted to say, but he wasn't given to pouring out his heart. I love you, please stay. He invited her to go with him to the opening game of the summer tournament at Koshien. They arrived at the stadium early enough to get seats behind home base. The bleachers quickly filled, over 57,000 spectators in all, there to cheer on their hometown heroes. The nervous energy radiating through the stands was contagious. Hideki's stomach was awhirl. Beside him, Christine sat with her back perfectly straight, her fingers knotted together. She could feel it too. They watched as teams from as far away as Hokkaido and Okinawa marched in lockstep once around the field, then to the center where they lined up in rows. During the opening ceremony, they remained statue still, in spite of the blazing sun and the sweat dribbling down their faces. When they spotted the team from Tokushima, they clapped harder. They'd beat out 32 other teams in the prefecture to make it to the national level. Only one team from Tokushima had ever won the national championship. That had been Ikeda High School back in 1980. But just getting to Koshien was an accomplishment worth celebrating. For the rest of their lives, they would be honored and anointed by their time on the field. On a more practical level, it looked good on a college application or resume. Hideki translated for Christine while the captain from the previous year's winning team issued remarks, and then the Crown Prince delivered his greeting from high up, the highest, in the bleachers, reminiscing about past games. They watched the teams file off the grounds with military precision, and then the two teams matched up in the first game took to the field for preliminary practice. Finally, a brand new baseball was dropped from a helicopter, and the starting pitcher stepped up to the mound. As they sat in the bleachers, Hideki watched Christine in profile. Her lightly freckled face was shaded by a straw boater, and her hair, gathered into a French braid and hanging down her back, glimmered in the sun like spun gold. Whenever a player stepped up to bat, she leaned forward on the bench, biting down so hard on her lower lip that he worried she'd split the skin. Someday I'm coming back here with my team, Hideki said. Christine turned to him and smiled. They both knew that he didn't have a team, not yet, and that schools with winning teams did their best to hold on to their coaches for as long as possible. There weren't many openings for new coaches, and when there were, they were usually at the schools with the worst teams. If his wish were granted, if he were made baseball coach at a high school in Tokushima, he would have a lot of work to do. It's good to have a dream, she said. They heard the ping of struck aluminum and turned back to the game in time to see the ball flying over the fence. Home run. Dream big, Christine said. I'll stop there. Should I keep going? I could read another. Do you want to read something else?
We've got a couple minutes left if you've got another passage, or if we have maybe a final question. Got time for either of those.
Okay, does anyone have any final questions?
Where'd your dad, what company was your dad with in Lexington?
Cooper. Yeah.
Gardner Denver was the
Pardon?
Gardner Denver was the company that moved them down, and then they turned into Cooper Tools.
So,
Yeah.
one of the things you mentioned when you do move to Japan is that you don't live near your husband's family, which traditionally, that would have been a traditional thing to be with family.
No, we did. We lived with my mother-in-law.
So very different. I mean, I think we see more multi-generation here, but I think it's much more of a tradition in Japan than you see here.
Right. So, traditionally, the oldest son has to take care of his parents. So my husband is and the younger ones are like free to do whatever, right? So my husband was the oldest son. So, he felt obligated to stay in Shikoku, Tokushima, and be near them and take care of them. So we did live, we lived near them, and then later, after my father-in-law died, we like moved into with my mother-in-law. So, and she passed away a couple years ago. So. Right.
What's your favorite food?
I like a lot of things, but I do like sushi.
And then natto.
I like natto is like fermented beans. So I actually like natto.
Good.
And rice and mixed with the rice and
Raw egg on top.
yeah, it's really good for you too. I heard.
Very good.
So some people speculated that Japanese weren't like getting sick from COVID because of because of
natto?
fermented food like
Oh yeah, fermented.
like natto and sauerkraut and things like that.
Pickles.
Pickles, yeah. So one thing you might be interested in knowing is that I also wrote like a sort of spin-off of this book called Pop Flies, Robopets, and Other Stories, which was a middle grade book. And it was, I took out the high school baseball player and I wrote like a whole novel for him. And then it turned out to be so different that it was just, I put him back in. Two different stories. Yeah.
I may have missed it in the beginning. I apologize if I did. But has this been translated?
Not yet. It just came out like in October.
Oh.
So, yeah, it would be nice if someone translated it. Yeah, it's going to be an audiobook.
In Japanese? English?
No, in English,
Oh.
but no translation yet.
Well, if that's our last question, then I suppose our official last question is, would you like to sign some books for us, perhaps?
I'm happy to.
Yes. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, Suzanne. We really appreciate you coming to